I would like to tell you about my creation. Town Portal Arcade. But first, a message from our sponsors.
I don't say nonsense. At a dinner table, I remember Hasegawa saying, the particular cultural background of a certain I've been interested in the psychological dynamics of it. Why it happens, what happens, how it comes to be described in different symbolisms with different languages. And to see if I could find out what are the means of bringing it about, frankly. I've often felt that the traditional ways of cultivating it are analogous to say, medieval medicine, where a concoction is prepared that consists of roasted toads, rope from the gallows, henbane, mandrake, a boiled red dog, and all such things, you see, and a great brew is made. Now I assume that some sort of old wives' tradition had it so that this thing really did do you some good. But a modern chemist looks at that and says, this may have done some good, but what was the essential ingredient? And so I ask in the same way, when people do yoga, when they practice Zen, when they do the bhakti thing of religious devotion to a god of some kind, all the various things people do, even to the extent of taking psychedelic chemicals, what does all this have in common? What is the essential ingredient that takes place here? And let's cut out the nonsense, which is purely something that goes with the particular cultural background of a certain way of approach to this state of consciousness. I don't say nonsense. I shouldn't have used that word, because I could call it embellishments, decorations, not nonsense. But if we look behind that to what is essential, is there something that can be said about that? Now, it always strikes one at first, it struck me as a student of these things, that Zen got very close to essentials. This was a first impression. Because the way Suzuki presented it, it was the direct way. It was the sudden way of seeing right through into one's nature now, at this moment. And although there is a good deal of talk about that in Zen, in some ways it's more talk than practice. Although once at a dinner table, I remember Hasegawa saying, when somebody asks him, how long does it take to attain an understanding of Zen? He said, it may take you 3 minutes. It may take you 30 years. And he said, I mean that. And it's that 3 minutes, you see, that tantalizes people. We of the West want instant results. And one of the difficulties of instant results is that they're sometimes in poor quality. For example, most instant coffee is a punishment for people who are in too much of a hurry to get real coffee. And certainly these dialer meal automat drive-in places where you put in your money and you have 12 choices and you dial a meal and it delivers it to you in exactly 60 seconds. You might just as well eat with the pigs. It looks prettier, but there's nothing much in it. So there is something to be said against hurry. But there are two sides to this. And it strikes me in this way. It isn't a matter of time at all. The people who think it ought to take a long time are one school of thought. The people who want it as quickly as possible, who are in fact in a hurry, is another school of thought, and they're both wrong. Because it is not a question of how much time you put into it, as if this added up some sort of quantitative scale and you got rewarded according to the amount of effort you put into it. Nor is there a way of avoiding the effort just to be lazy and say, I want it now. The point is rather something like this. If you try to get it either by an instant method or by a long-term method, you can't get it either way. The only thing that effort or absence of effort can teach you is that it doesn't work. The middle way is, Buddhism is always called the middle way. It's not just a sort of compromise situation. Middle here means above and beyond extremes. To him that hath shall be given. In other words, you can only get it when you discover that you don't need it. You can only get it when you don't want it. And so you say, how do I learn not to want it, not to go after this? Either by the long-term method or by the instant method. And obviously, if you ask that, you still are seeking it, and thereby not getting it. If, as the Zen master says, you have a stick, I will give you one. If you have not, I'll take it away from you. Which is the same as to him that hath shall be given. And from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. So then, we are in a situation here where it seems that all our accustomed thinking, all our normal ways of thinking about solving problems doesn't work. All thinking based on acquisition is here obsolete. We have, as it were, to get into a new dimension of approaching this altogether. And that is why a young Zen student I know, he's now finished his Zen training, he's Japanese, said a little while ago, if I were asked what is really essential in Zen, it would be what is called Sanzen. That is the dialogue between the master and the student. The person-to-person contact. He said, rather than Zazen, sitting meditation, or anything like that, it is the Sanzen that is the crux of it. I don't think this was just a way of saying that the one thing that is essential is the apostolic succession. I think it's rather saying this, that it is in the peculiar circumstances of that dialogue that we can get into the dimension I'm talking about. Because you see, what in effect this dialogue is that the master always throws back to the student the question he's asked. He doesn't answer any questions. Not really. He merely throws the question back at you so that you yourself understand why you're asking it and why you are creating the problem which the question expresses.
But, oh, nothingness. Blech! Heaven preserve us from that. But
the whole thing about Zen is really extraordinarily simple when one doesn't try to be cute about it and beat around the bush. Zen is simply the sensation, a totally clear understanding that, to put it in Zen terms, 10,000 formations, one suchness. Or you might say, the 10,000 things, that is everything, is of one suchness. That is to say that there is simply behind and appearing as the multiplicity of events and creatures in this universe, simply one energy, and you're it, and everything is it. And the work of Zen is to understand that, as to say, so as to feel it in your bones. But Zen has nothing to say about what that energy is. And this, of course, gives the impression in the minds of Westerners that it is like, we would say, blind energy. Because the only alternative to that we can suppose, thinking in terms of our traditions, is that it's something like God. That is to say, a kind of cosmic ego, an intelligent being, almost personal. But that, in Buddhistic view, would be as far off the point as thinking of it as blind energy. The reason why this word suchness is used is to leave the whole thing open and absolutely free from definition. Because the whole point about this energy is that it should be unformulated. That is not to say formless in the sense of, some kind of goo, thank you, which is just a featureless mess. It means that at the basis of everything, there is something which in the nature of things never could be made an object, discerned, figured out, explained. For in just the same way, just exactly the same way, the eyes, when seeing, apparently have no color and no form of their own. If the eyes had a form of their own, they would distort all the forms that we see, and perhaps in some sense they do. If the eyes had a color of their own, that is to say, if the lens had a color, it would screen out that color in nature. And so you would never see it, you would never be aware of it. But we are not aware of the color of the eye, of the lens, because it is basic to all sight. And so in exactly the same way, one would never be aware of the structure, the nature of the basic energy of the world, because you are it. And everything is it. And you might say, well, that doesn't make any difference then. And it's true, it doesn't. But it does make a difference in the life and feeling of a person who realizes that that is so. Although it doesn't make any particular difference to anything that happens, except this one important matter. If there were no eye, there would be no sight. It's true, we have this sight and that, and the structure of the eye doesn't make any difference to this sight and that. But upon it depends the possibility of seeing. And so upon this energy depends the whole possibility of there being a universe. That's rather important, but it's so important that we overlook it. It doesn't enter, shall we say, into practical considerations and prognostications. That's true. And therefore, modern logicians in the philosophy departments will argue that all assertions about this energy, as that it is there at all, are meaningless. And that, in a way, is true. Because the world itself is, from the point of view of strict logic, quite meaningless, in the sense that it is not a sign, a symbol pointing to something else. So then, while that is all taken for granted, it nevertheless makes a great deal of difference to how you feel about this world, and therefore to how you act, if you know that there is just this, and that it is you, and that it is beyond time, beyond space, beyond definition, and that if you clearly come to a realization that this is how things are, it gives you a certain bounce. You can enter into life with an abandon, with a freedom from basic terror, which you would not ordinarily have. Yes, you can be very hooked on the form of life which you are now living. You can consider that myself, say as Alan Watts, is an immensely important event, one which I wish to preserve and continue as long as possible. But the truth of the matter is that I know I won't be able to, and that everything falls apart in the end. But if you realize this fundamental energy, you have the prospect of appearing again in innumerable forms, all of which, when you're in them, will seem just as important as this one you have now. Just as problematic, perhaps, too. Only this is not something to be believed in, because if you believe that that is so upon hearsay, then you have missed the point. You don't need to believe in this. You don't need to formulate it. You don't need to hang on to it in any way, because you can't get away from it. There is no need to believe in it. And if you do believe in it, it indicates that you have some doubts in the matter. That is why Zen has been called the religion of no religion. You don't need, as it were, to cling to yourself. Faith in yourself is not holding on to yourself. And that is why when some Zen master is given by his student the statement, 10,000 formations, one suchness, the Zen master says, get rid of it. And that is why also in the practice of certain forms of Zen meditation, there is a rugged struggle of the person to get beyond all formulations whatsoever, to throw away all hang-ups, to endure long hours of sitting with aching knees and perpetual frustration in trying to get hold of what all this is about with tremendous earnestness. I've got to find out what the mystery of life is, who I am, what this energy is. And you go, and he knocks down every formulation you bring to him, because you don't need one. Only the ordinary person, on hearing that you don't need one, will forget all about it and go and think about something else. So he never crosses the barrier. And when you do see it, it is so obvious, so totally obvious, that there is just one energy, and that consciousness and unconsciousness, being and not being, life and death, are its polarities. It is always undulating in this way. Now you see it, now you don't. Now it's here, now it isn't. Because that on and off is the energy. We wouldn't know the energy was there unless it was vibrating. And the only way to vibrate is to go on and off. So, life and death. It's like that. And that's what Zen about. And that's all it's about. Of course, other things derive from that. In Zen training, the first thing to do is to understand that, to get the feeling of its complete obviousness. But then what follows from that is how does a person who feels that way live in this world? What do you do about other people who don't see that that's so? What do you do about conducting yourself in this world? That is the really difficult part of Zen training. There is at first the breakthrough, which involves certain difficulties, but thereafter there's the whole question of learning compassion and tact and skill, as Jesus put it, to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And that is really what takes most of the time. You might divide then the training in Zen into two stages corresponding to the two great schools of Buddhism. The Hinayana stage and the Mahayana stage. The Hinayana stage is to get to nirvana, to get to living in the great void. But then the Mahayana stage is to come back, as the Bodhisattva comes back from nirvana, out of compassion for all sentient beings, to help even the grass to become enlightened. And so it is that Mahayana aspect of Zen which occupies most of the time of learning to be proficient in Zen. Well, I say this by way of introduction, just to make everything clear from the start, and without being deceptive about it or befuddling you with Zen stories, where, although they are really quite clear, the point doesn't get across very easily to Westerners, except as something fascinating. The principle, of course, underlying Zen stories, with all their strangely seeming irrelevant remarks, is quite simple. It's all explained in the Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, Huineng, when he says, if somebody asks you a question about matters sacred, always answer in terms of matters profane. If they ask you about ultimate reality, answer in terms of everyday life. If they ask you about everyday life, answer in terms of ultimate reality. Master, please hand me the knife. And he hands him the knife blade first. Please give me the other end. What would you do with the other end? This is answering an everyday matter in terms of the metaphysical. Master, what is the fundamental principle of Buddhism? There is enough breeze in this fan to keep me cool. That is answering the metaphysical in terms of the everyday. And that's more or less the principle it works on. Now, people who go to Japan to study Zen have read about it in the writings of Suzuki and R.H. Blythe and myself, and very often they're in for a curious shock. They suppose that Zen people are kind of Quakerish. That is to say, very simple, very unritualistic, iconoclastic, because they've read stories about tearing up sutras and burning Buddhas. And they suppose also that Zen people live with the utmost frugality and simplicity in very plain dwellings. And they are shocked to find that procedures in a Zen monastery, in Zen temples, are highly ritualistic. That the temple buildings and grounds are positively sumptuous, and that Zen is existing in terms of a big ecclesiastical organization with hierarchies, with formulations, with all the things that one would recognize as characteristic of ecclesiastical organizations all over the world. I have perhaps the advantage over some students of having been deeply involved in Christian ecclesiastical organizations, and therefore I'm able to recognize the traits and the foibles of this sort of professional community anywhere in the world. But in order to see that, you have first to penetrate through a certain superficial glamour. Zen to Zen people is quite an everyday matter. But to the outsider, the chants, the incense, the mysterious iconography of the Buddhas, the serene expressions of Zen masters, the real mysterious East, the occult tradition, the great masters of wisdom. And I suppose likewise, to some Indian or Japanese visitor, the mysteries of the Catholic Church must be very glamorous and appear in much the same guise as their things appear to us. Now it must be understood, therefore, that Zen in Japan today has indeed hardened into a traditional ecclesiastical tradition. You know, most of the monks in the monasteries are the sons of priests. You see, when a Zen monastery is a seminary more than a monastery. It's a training school. It isn't a monastery in our sense where you take life vows and you enter into the monastery for your whole life with the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. It's a training school from which you graduate in due course when the teacher thinks you're ready. And after you graduate from the Sodo, which simply means the So is a Sino-Japanese way of pronouncing Sangha, which means the order of followers of the Buddha who have taken the vows of the bhikshu, or we would say monk. Monk isn't really the right word. And do means hall. So when you've taken the training, there are various options open to you. And the usual one is to become a temple priest. Every Zen monastery stands in the middle of an enormous campus. There is the training center, and then surrounding it ever so many separate buildings which are individual temples. And these temples were originally built by wealthy patrons of the monastery to provide a place where a priest would for all time chant sutras for the future assistance of the wealthy patron through his future incarnations. And likewise in villages all over Japan there are temples of the various sects of Buddhism to serve the villagers, where the priest will recite the sutras on the occasion of a death, or help out in sickness, or offer memorial services for the ancestors. And that's the main job of these people. Occasionally they will take a few students for meditation, but by and large the Zen priest is a sutra chanter, and this is true of almost all Buddhist priests, serving the community in much the same way as a Catholic priest serves a parish. But you see, these temples are passed down in the family from father to son. So my oldest son should take over the temple from me if I'm a priest. So I say, you go to the Zen monastery and you train there until the teacher says you're ready, and then you can come back and help me out around the temple, and when I die or retire, you take it over. So most of the boys, and they are boys, many of them just out of high school, some of them are just out of college. The Zen sect runs one or two colleges to prepare its students for the monastery, and therefore the college curriculum is oriented in a Buddhist direction, as well as teaching some basic subjects, mathematics and literature and so on, at college level. But therefore, the boys in there are not really there because they have a strong vocation for it. They are there because they've been sent there through parental authority. And therefore it is not surprising that their attitude to Zen is rather mechanical. I notice this more in the Soto sect than in the Rinzai sect. I made 2 visits to Eiheiji, which is a most gorgeous monastery, about 120 miles north of Kyoto in the mountains. It is one of the most beautiful places on earth, tremendous place, and about 100 and odd monks are studying there. But those monks are, as far as I can see, principally preoccupied with manners. They are absolutely fanatical, one might say, about good form. And it's true, they are beautiful looking people, very industrious, they are neat to a fault. You could lick the floor in the toilets, it's so clean. It's orderly, precise, and the chief monks and priors, you might call them, are very strict. But to a great extent it is a kind of mechanical existence. They are going through a prolonged hazing process, as it were, in order to be fit to take over father's job and to have Zen style. Zen style is very important, just as we train physicians to have a good bedside manner, or a priest to behave as a priest in the style of a priest, and that carries with it a certain aura of tradition and authority and conviction. And so these boys are trained very carefully to walk, to carry themselves, to speak and behave according to Zen style. And it's very pleasant, I must say. They are very presentable people. They're unlike ordinary Japanese people in that they're not nervous. They don't giggle when embarrassed. It's difficult to embarrass them. And occasionally, every now and then, one of them turns out to be an enthusiast and really gets through with Zen. But by and large, I'm sorry to say that in both the Rinzai and the Soto schools, a large number of products are graduated who really have no feeling for Zen, who never quite got the point, but managed to struggle through the motions. And thus there are increasingly few great teachers of Zen in the country. There is, however, an awakening going on, and times are beginning to change, and to a great extent this is the result of the Western interest in Zen. As a matter of fact, this sort of revival is true all over Asia. If you read a book by Ernst Benz called Buddhism or Communism, it's very fascinating. And he shows to what extent there has been a Buddhist revival in Asia through Western intervention, interest, and so on. And this is particularly true in Japan. It all started with Suzuki giving his fascinating konon for everybody, making Zen, bringing out its great profundity. So people came over and began asking questions. And some of those old teachers were just, were suddenly startled. What's all this about? Had to drag out the old koans and dust them off and try to think about how to present this to Westerners. Well, that was very good for the situation. But in the ordinary way, I must tell you, it is so funny. I went to the opening service of the ecclesiastical year at Daitokuji. And on this occasion, there is a fantastic beating of drums to rouse everybody throughout the campus. Big area. Wonderful drum beats. It sounds so almost African. And gradually all the temple priests come from their various parts of the precincts and gather in the Sodo, the monks' hall. And then all the monks come, and they, as the drumming ends, they have a great chanting. They chant several sutras. And then the master gives a lecture called Teisho. And he sits in his throne with a reading stand held up in front of him by one of the monks. And opposite him is the Buddha, sitting in his shrine. And the Teisho is a commentary on some old Zen text like the Rinzai Roku, in which the master has a dialogue with the Buddha. He gives it in a very monotonous way, hardly ever raises his voice, and if some interruption occurs, like a rainstorm or something like that, he just goes straight on. He doesn't stop, because it doesn't seem to be of the slightest importance whether anybody listens. During this period, clever monks go to sleep. You can tell by a slight drop of their shoulders. They're sitting there looking as if they're meditating, but actually they're asleep. And they've worked out a system whereby, you know how you can work an alarm clock to wake yourself up at a given time. They wake up, the monk in charge, who has to hit the clapper or ring the bell, is always awake about 5 minutes before the lecture ends. It's quite long. As I remember sitting Japanese fashion through its duration, with a tape recorder beside me, looking like a suitcase, this one. But there were these monks. They were asleep. So they are just exactly like schoolboys. And undergraduate fraternity men, and seminarists, the world over. They would much rather be over the wall smoking a cigarette or dating girls in town. But as I say, every so often, one of them really comes through. So, then Westerners, you see, are bothered also by the ritual and the splendor. To give, I'm sure many of you here have been to Japan and have seen these things, but it's what I would call ascetic luxury. Imagine living in rooms where the fusuma, the screens that divide rooms, are covered in gold leaf and painted by the most gorgeous artists of all time. Seshu, the Kano school, and so on. Here you are, and you've got outside your window gardens which are beyond belief in beauty and marvelously tended. It's true, you do yourself, even as a temple priest, kind of a top dog, you do a certain amount of the work yourself in keeping this place tidy. But that's pretty much what you have to do. And scrounge around for funds. That's a real problem these days. Since just before the Second World War, the Buddhist church or Buddhist churches were disestablished. They were deprived of an enormous amount of their lands and endowments by the government. And so as a result of that, every temple on a temple campus has to make do somehow. So what do? Some of them have opened restaurants, very good restaurants. Some of them are tourist centers, and they like Daisen Inn in Daitokuji, where they encourage people to come and look at the garden. And one of the monks gives a lecture, even in English, which he's learned by heart, to explain the symbolism of the garden. He invented it himself, I found out. Yes. He made it up. And he gives the speech in English with great eloquence and with a wonderful twinkle in his eye. He's a very nice fellow. So, but therefore they do these things, like Mr. Ogata at Shokokuji has opened a studies center for Westerners with a library. All this is done to maintain the temple in existence. And otherwise they just get closed down and they fall apart. The government does give some grants, especially where a temple houses a national treasure. Say, there's a temple in Daitokuji where the priest is a Mr. Kobori, and he's descended from the great family of Kobori Enshu, who was a master gardener. And he's a wonderful man, speaks beautiful English, and is very good at calligraphy. And his temple houses two of the most valuable paintings in the world, which are the Persimmons and the Chestnuts by Muchi. And so he is very happy to entertain Westerners on a sort of individual basis to see these things and drink tea, realizing that these Westerners will kick in a donation. And the temple badly needs a donation because it has to be completely repaired. They're very clever at that, the Japanese carpenters. They can take an old building and underpin it, reconstruct it, put in new beams and everything, and it's exactly like it was before they started, except it's been simply reformulated. If a temple gets burned down, they have models and plans, and they can make it exactly as it was. Most of the ancient buildings in Japan have all been burned down, and they're actually quite modern. But they're perfect replicas. After Kinkakuji, the Golden Pavilion, you know, and the story by Mishima was burned down by a mad monk. It's there again, shining with gold as it was in the old days when it was brand new. So, this I think, this impoverishment has been very healthy, because otherwise, if they had sat back on their donations, and they would have just gone to sleep. As it is, they have to do something to function as a temple in some way. And this also has been a helpful influence in bringing about some kind of a revival. The success in education or religion is of a deadly thing. I know so many worthwhile causes that started out struggling and they had something really great. And then when they succeeded, they became sloppy and eventually fell apart. Or they meant worse still, instead of falling apart, they just go on and on and on being dull. That so easily happens. So this poverty has been a good thing. But the real struggle and the real problem is this. The younger generation in Japan is not interested in Buddhism, period. If you ask a Japanese, say roughly between 30 and 40, what's your religion? He's apt to say, my parents are Buddhists. As for himself, he has no interest and he knows nothing about it. When they hear sutra chanting, they think, oh, what a bore. Nobody understands it anyway, because the sutras are chanted in the Sino-Japanese. That is to say, it is a peculiar Japanese way of pronouncing Chinese. It is not the Japanese way of pronouncing Japanese. And so nobody knows what's it about. Most of the people who are chanting don't know what it's about. And of course some of it, insofar as it's what's called dharani, didn't mean anything in the first place. And so they have this modern feeling. What does it all mean? Second generation Japanese in the United States can't stand it when the priests chant a sutra to pacify the old folks. They want the whole thing changed. And they sing in the Buddhist churches in the United States, Buddha loves me, this I know, for the sutra tells me so. They have Sunday school and everything. They organize just like a Protestant church. Because the Nisei and the Sansei, second and third generation Japanese, want to slip into the American scene. And unlike the Chinese, who are very retentive of their culture, the Japanese settlers here seem to want to lose it and become Rotarian. And so in Japan today, much the same situation prevails. There is an extraordinary outbreak of new religions, which we would call cults, like Tenrikyu and so on. But so far as Buddhism is concerned, the younger generation couldn't care less. And that's why, you see, the only young people who frequent the temples, by and large, are priests' sons. The average young man in Japan today is full of energy. So are the girls. They are the most marvelous people. The children would thrill you. They are so beautiful and intelligent and polite and gay. And but they are breaking away totally from the older people. In fact, many young people in Japan hate to go home after school because they feel the atmosphere of disapproval on the part of their parents and grandparents is so thick you could cut it with a knife. So instead of that, they wander the streets. Not in a rowdy way at all. But they just like to be away and be on their own. So they go to, first of all, pachinko parlors. A pachinko parlor would be a store about the size of this one, lined entirely with pinball machines. And you get a handful of steel ball bearings and you put those into that machine, and with fascination you watch that hour after hour after hour, and the machine is rigged so as to give you back just enough balls to keep you going, you see. And you win little prizes like a package of cigarettes or something like that. Nothing much. It's not real gambling at all. It's just a fascination. And you can hear these things going clinker, clanker, clang, clatter, clatter, clatter. Every village has one, at least one. The other thing they do is go to coffee houses. And coffee houses are of various kinds according to musical classification. Western classical, modern jazz, Dixieland, various things of that kind. And the music is turned up full strength. There are two reasons for this. One is that in the Far East, people don't feel they're getting their money's worth unless they get their radio as loud as possible and keep it on all the time. The other is the loud music drowns out voices so that you can talk to another individual without being overheard. And so the coffee house is a great center for dating. You take a girl there, and they have a thing they call getting to know each other, which has never happened in Japan before. The only way in the
I wanted to explain Town Portal Arcade. It is a creation build of each component I have in my inventory. It is a Buddhist temple, restaurant, and shop called Buddha Burger, and a futuristic lounge and commons where the mundane is archivified so anyone who doesn't have adequate home or is still building it may participate in the town. What is town? A place with people, they are called townsfolk. Or residents. What is portal? It is the symbol of futuristic invention wherein value is delivered to the portal user immediate win. Immediately. The direct experience of immediacy. What is arcade? It is the object described by the pachinko parlor, and in spirit places like this internet world. A futuristic object embodying both business and personal values where all may participate for its own sake. Most importantly, the arcade business is a system of machines that users access using coins. We have machines for every amenity and human right. Welcome to Sleep Library. Just one example, the machine where you can rest is called Welcome to Sleep Library. Town Portal Arcade is the project my heart contains. Also referred to as struct ESC. Named after the escape key and the action of escaping from manipulation and the overall institution of authority structures. Which is a primary concern of Zen or of philosophy of direct experience in the whole sense. I guess that's all I have to say on it for now.